Just a reminder to vote in this week's Locals poll, where you decide what deck I take to Locals every single week. Without any further ado, I hope you enjoyed the video. What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, and for today we've got the profile for the deck we brought to Locals this past week, being Frightfur, or some people just call it Fluffle, but I like to call it Frightfur. We did pretty good. We ended up only having time to play one match, and we did come out on top. We beat Novellas, so that was really nice. Yeah, really fun deck. I have really enjoyed this deck ever since building it. Here's a look to what it looks like on paper, then we'll get to the card by card. Alright, so starting off with the monsters, we're going to start off with our 3 copies of Fluffle Dog. So Dog here, he's a good boy. When he's normal or special summoned, he fetches us an Edgemp Sabers or a Fluffle monster from our deck. That is a hard once per turn, but it's usually not that difficult. The deck does a lot of searching and a lot of stuff out of the graveyard, so it's usually not that big of a deal, but Dog is a very good card in the deck. Next, I'm running 2 Fluffle Penguin. So Penguin, during our main phase, if it's on our field, we can special summon a Fluffle monster from your hand. And then if its main effect is actually the Grave effect. When it's sent to the graveyard as fusion material for a fusion summon of a Frightfur, you get to draw 2 and discard 1. So that can really help with further graveyard setup, drawing into further fusion spells, etc. Also on 1 Fluffle Dolphin, this one we can target a toy vendor in our graveyard, set it, and then we get to send a Fluffle or Edgemp Sabers from our deck to the grave. So it can be really useful, but since it doesn't special summon itself, it would take up our normal summon, and Dog is just better. However, its Grave effect is fairly useful. When we use it for a fusion material and it's sent to the grave, we can shuffle one of our fusion or polymerization spells that is banished in our graveyard back into the deck. So being able to get a resource to search out later, it's not bad. Next, 3 copies of Fluffle Bear. This one is, its main effect is to send it from hand to grave to set a toy vendor from our deck. It does have a second effect where you can tribute it to target a polymerization in your grave and add it to your hand, but there are other cards that can do that without sacrificing a monster. So its main effect is, or the main effect we use rather, is just to set the toy vendor. Next, 1 copy of Fluffle Owl. This one, when it's normal or special from the hand, you can add a polymerization from deck to your hand, or you can pay 500 life points to fusion summon a Frightfur using stuff from your hand or field. So it can serve as basically a double fusion spell. It does have the restriction where you can only use 1 effect per turn and only once that turn. So you have to choose which one you do, but if you have, like, say, a polymerization in your hand, you can activate the effect to pay 500, fusion summon a Frightfur, and then polymerization into Sabers or something, or not Sabers, Sabertooth. Finally, rounding out the Fluffle monsters are 2 copies of Wings. So this is a target that we can send off of the effect of Dolphin, because it has direct synergy with Toy Vendor, or we can also discard it with some of the cards we're going to talk about later. While it's in your graveyard and you have Toy Vendor on your field, you can banish this and 1 other Fluffle monster in your graveyard. Okay, so you banish 2 Fluffles, including this card, and if you do, draw a card. And then you have the option to send Toy Vendor to the graveyard to draw an additional card. So yeah, draw power, really nice. And once we cover Toy Vendor, that'll be even more apparent. Next, moving on to the Edgemp monsters, starting with 2 copies of Edgemp Chain. So Its main effect is when it's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Frightfur card from your deck to your hand. That is a huge, huge effect for the deck. We can search Frightfur Fusion or Patchwork, all sorts of stuff. Next, 2 copies of Edge Imp Sabers. Basically, we almost never use its effect to special summon itself from the grave. But Sabers is a core part of the deck. Many of the Frightfur Fusion monsters mention Sabers as material. 1 Edge Imp Saw. This is just for another name for some of our more generic Frightfur Fusion monsters that don't require a specifically named Edge Imp monster. Then there is one Frightfur monster that does require this one that I really, really like. And then finally, 3 copies of Edge Imp Scythe. So Scythe is a godsend for the deck, okay? Because obviously this is an OTK deck. You want to go second. But this actually gives you an option to do on your opponent's turn. Because during your opponent's main phase, as a quick effect, you can reveal this card in your hand and fusion summon a Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand revealed as material, including this card in your hand. And then if a Frightfur Fusion monster you control will be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this from your grave instead. But this allows you to actually get stuff on the field during your opponent's turn, mainly Cruel Whale, which can provide interruption. So really, really nice. So of course we're going to max out on that one. Alright, that's it for the monsters. Now let's go to the spells. Of course, we've talked about it before with things like Fluffle Wings and Fluffle Bear. 3 copies of Toy Vendor. So once per turn, you can discard a card and draw a card, and then you reveal it. If it is a Fluffle monster, you can special summon a monster from your hand. If it is not a Fluffle monster, the card is discarded. And then if this card is sent to the grave, you can add either a Fluffle monster or an Edge Imp Sabers from your deck to your hand. So I think you will notice the lack of a hard once per turn. So if you're able to reset it with something like Dolphin, or if you have multiple copies in your hand, you know, you can actually use both. So Toy Vendor is really, really nice. And then of course with Wings, being able to not only draw 2, but then also get the search with this is really, really nice. Next, moving on to some of our Frightfur cards. I got 1 Frightfur Factory, and I'll go ahead and talk about Toy Parade as well. Toy Parade is always treated as a Frightfur card, just for reference. So Frightfur Factory, you can banish a polymerization spell card or a spell that has the word fusion in its name to fusion summon a Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as material. And then if this card gets sent to the grave, you can target a banished Frightfur Fusion and add it to your hand. So this provides for further extension, being able to go into more and more fusion monsters. Toy Parade, as I said, it's always treated as a Frightfur card. It does have an effect from your field, or from when you activate it on the field. You can target a dark monster you control special with the extra deck. Only that monster can attack. However, whenever it destroys a monster by battle sent to the grave, it can attack again. So this is really useful with Frightfur Bear especially, because every time it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, it equips it and just gets bigger. But the main reason we run this is actually its grave effect. If you control a fairy monster, you can banish this from your grave to add a level 4 lower dark monster from your grave to your hand. Now, unfortunately, it can't be the same turn that this was sent to the graveyard, but with Cruel Whale, we can actually send this to the graveyard during our opponent's turn, and then we can get one of our Edge Imps back as fusion material the next turn. So we mainly run this just to dump it from the deck to the graveyard with Cruel Whale's effect. Next, 2 copies of Frightfur Fusion. Fusion summon a Frightfur fusion mod from extra deck by banishing the materials listed on it, and that is a once per turn. So this is basically Miracle Fusion for Frightfurs. Enough said. Next, going on to our 3 copies of Frightfur Patchwork. This card is, of course, exceedingly good in the deck. We get to add an Agent monster and a polymerization from our deck to our hand. It is a hard once per turn, but a double search is really nice. Especially when that, in and of itself, can facilitate fusion summon, so that's really nice. Next, 1 copy of Instant Fusion, and then, of course, 2 Polymerization. So, Instant Fusion, we pay 1,000, special summon a level 5 or lower monster from our extra deck, and it's treated as a proper fusion summon. That monster cannot attack and is destroyed during the end phase. So this is used with Frightfur Sheep, just as kind of a way to get into Sabretooth more easily. 2 Polymerization, it's just your standard fusion spell. Everyone knows what it does. We're running 2 because we are able to get it back from our graveyard with a card that we will cover here shortly. And then also we're able to search it from the deck with things like Fluffle Owl or Frightfur Patchwork. And there's actually also another card that will also search it from the deck, but we'll get that in a minute. Next, 3 copies of Fusion Deployment. Basically, we reveal a fusion monster in our extra deck and special summon a monster from our deck whose name is specifically listed on that monster. One of our main targets for this is actually Frightfur Sheep, because we can get Agent Chain, fuse it away, get a search, and then just pop off from there. You are locked into fusions only for the turn that you activate this, so do keep that in mind. And finally, rounding out the main deck, we have 1 copy of Terraforming and 3 copies of Fusion Recycling Plant. So Terraforming, it just searches the field spell. And then Fusion Recycling Plant, you can discard a card to add a polymerization from your deck or grave to hand. This is what I was mentioning earlier. And then once per turn during the end phase, you can target a monster in your grave that was used as fusion material this turn and add it to your hand. So this, of course, being able to get some of our Edge Imps back from our grave to our hand so we can go into more fusion summons the next turn is always nice. This is not a hard once per turn, so if you have multiple copies and have the discards, you can actually do this more than once per turn. That actually came up in the match against Novellas, where I used it twice, because I drew it off of Fluffle Penguin's effect. I drew the second one and used it, so yeah, that's it for the main deck. Now let's go to the extra deck. 2 copies of Frightfur Sheep. So Sheep, we have 2, 1 to use for instant fusion, and then the second one to reveal for fusion deployment. That way we can just get Edge Imp Chain straight out of the deck. It does have an effect, though, if you can revive it off of Sabretooth, where when it battles, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. And then if it gets destroyed and sent to the grave, then you can revive it from your grave, and it gains 800 attack. So it revives itself as a 2800. So that's nice. But like I said, it's mainly just to get the Sabretooth easier. Next, 2 copies of Frightfur Tiger. So we're running 2. I think the last time I did a deck profile on this, we only played 1. But I decided to bump it up to 2. Just because it is that good. So when it's fusion summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of fusion materials used for this card's fusion summon and destroy them. And then also it just buffs all Frightfur monsters you control by 300 for each Fluffle and Frightfur on your field. You can only control 1. However, usually you're only going to need 1 to try to OTK because, you know, you wipe the board and then attack with a bunch of monsters for game. But this way, if our opponent somehow stops the first one, we can just do it again next turn. Next, one copy of Frightfur Wolf. This one is a prime target for a Frightfur fusion. So basically, for every material that it's summoned with, it can attack an additional time. So if you fusion summon it using, Edge Imp Sabers and 3 Fluffles, it can attack 4 times. So this is good for the OTK, of course. One Frightfur Bear. I really like this card. I know it's not the best in terms of Frightfurs, but I really do like this card. It takes Sabers plus Bear, so it is a little more hard to do, but I really like this in tandem with Toy Parade, because inevitably you are going to draw it. And I actually got to showcase that in one of the duels for the Training for Locals video. It was against the Crystron deck, where we basically just wiped his entire field with nothing but this card and Toy Parade. And this guy got huge. So, because when it destroys a opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the grave, that monster gets equipped to this card as an equipped card that gives it 1,000 attack. And then with Toy Parade, it allowed it to immediately attack again. So, I think it got up to like 5,200 or something. Next, one Frightfur Kraken. I really like this one as well. This one is generic. It's just any Edge Imp plus any Fluffle. And then once per turn, you can target a monster that your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. This card cannot attack directly the turn that you activate that effect. However, if you use this as material for Sabretooth and then bring the Kraken back, then you actually can attack directly because it's considered a new card. Or you can just activate the effect again, because it's a soft once per turn. This card can attack twice during the battle phase, and then at the end of the battle phase, it goes from attack to defense position. So yeah, really like Kraken. I also really like Frightfur Leo as well. This one requires Edge Imp Saw, and then any Fluffle monster. This one is a little more restrictive though, because it must be fusion summoned, so you can't revive it off of Sabretooth, unfortunately. But you get target a face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and inflict damage equal to its original attack. So that is really, really nice. Unfortunately, it can't attack directly the turn you activate this effect, but you should probably have other monsters during the turn you do that, so it should be fine. Next, 2 copies of Frightfur Sabretooth. So this one requires a Frightfur Fusion monster, plus 1 or more Fluffle and or Edge Imp monsters. You want to fusion summon this with 3 materials, because that gives it immunity from destruction by battle or card effect. It gives all Frightfurs 400 attack. And when it's fusion summoned, you can target a Frightfur in your grave and special summon it. Next, one Frightfur Daredevil. This one's actually from the manga. So it's also generic. Just any Edge Imp plus any Fluffle. When it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. And then if this gets destroyed, or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can inflict 500 to your opponent for each Frightfur monster in your grave. So this is also a pretty good target for Toy Parade if you inevitably draw it, because it will happen, let's face it. So you can get battle damage plus burn damage. Really nice. Next, 2 copies of Frightfur Cruel Whale. This one, of course, it takes any Edge Imp monster plus a Fluffle monster. Of course, you want to make this during your opponent's turn with Edge Imp Scythe. When it's fusion summoned, you get to just non-target destroy a card on both players' fields, and then as a quick effect, you can target a fusion monster you control, send a Frightfur card from deck or extra deck to the grave, and if you do target a monster, gain attack equal to half its original attack till the end of the turn. So this guy can pump it up, and this is, of course, how we get Toy Parade into the graveyard. However, we do also have 2 extra targets in our extra deck in case we draw the Toy Parade, being Frightfur Chimera and Dangerous Frightfur Nightmare. So these are literally just extra targets to send through Cruel Whale's effect. That's literally it. That's the only reason they're there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. This is a really fun deck. I like this deck a lot. It's really fun. and it's pretty budget friendly as well. So yeah, highly recommend it to new players. So yeah, like, subscribe on the locals poll, that good stuff, and I'll see you guys next time.